Hello and welcome to today's edition of The View from the Top. And we're live and we've got an amazing edition for you today. I'm delighted to say we've got not one, not two, not three, but all four of the big four here live. Well, they're actually backstage in our virtual green room at the moment. I'll bring them onto the stage in a moment. But we're going to have a really wide-ranging discussion with them. I mean, the big four, if you think about it, between them, they act, and in fact, we've got Julia Onslow-Cole from Fragomen as well. So if we add in Fragomen as well as the big four, in many ways, the big five, I suppose, they act for several million assignees or people who are moving cross-border every year. So really, really, really exciting, really in-depth. And of course, they also move many thousands of their own people. So they're there at both sides of this. They're there to look at all their clients who are moving people, but also to look after all their own people. So it's going to be a great discussion, so that's today. It's, as I said, it's the View from the Top meets the big four, and I really want you to be involved. We've had a bumper number of people who have signed up today, and what I want you to do is, if you're here, if you're out in LinkedIn world, come and say hi. Just tell us who you are, say where you're from, because it's only when you tell us that you're here, you're in LinkedIn world, that we know that you're here. So it's really important to us. Also, it's going to be a great opportunity to ask questions. We've got 5 leading experts today from the Big Four and from Fragomen who are here to answer your questions. So please do make the most of it and join in and join the conversation. That's what we'd really like today. So let me just tell you who our special guests are. I'll bring them on stage in a moment, but I'm delighted to say we're going to have Marc Burrows from KPMG. He's actually the global head of global mobility for KPMG. We've got Ed Hannibal. He's from Deloitte, and he specializes in consulting. We've got Clare Hughes from PwC. Again, a strategy consulting, mobility strategy consulting partner. And we've got Anja Valdiek from EY. And Anja heads up the internal program at EY. So we've got both the internal perspective and the external perspective. So it's going to be a great hour that we've got coming up. And we've got a huge number of people joining us from outside. I can see we've really got nearly 150 people listening in. So thank you all from everybody in LinkedIn world who's with us. Let me tell you a bit about what we've got coming up over the next couple of weeks. Next week, so I know we haven't even done this week's yet, but next week, I'm delighted to say that we've got Mike Piker and Michelle Durkin. Mike Piker is with Philip Morris, and Michelle Durkin was until a while back with Teva Pharmaceuticals, but now actually I'm delighted to say has actually joined the strategy council that we've set up at Benevo. So welcome to Mike and Michelle for next week. I also wanted to plug a conference that I'm chairing on the 23rd of June called Leaders in Global Mobility. This is a conference that I've been asked to curate and to chair. It's not my conference, but we've got over 17 speakers from major corporates, including such household names of Unilever, Dyson, Coca-Cola, Rolls-Royce, Centrica, King, and many, many more. If you're interested in coming to this conference, it's online. It's actually an all-day conference, so you can duck in and dive out as you wish during the day. Go and register. It's run by a company called Informa. Informa are actually a FTSE 100 company. They're probably one of the largest conference producers in the world. And it's completely free for in-house corporate professionals. And there is a charge for suppliers. But there is a discount code for anybody who's coming in through my connections. So if you're interested, do register for that. Anyway, what I'd like to do now is to start bringing in our guests and say hi. So let me just start off. I'll bring in, who have I got first? Well, let's bring in Julia. We'll have Julia. So here's Julia. Good to see Julia.
Hi. Good to see everyone.
And we've got loads and loads of people signing in. We've really got well over 200 online watching us. So I'll also bring in, we've got who have we got next? We've got Claire. So hi, Claire. Thanks and welcome to the View from the Top.
Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. Thanks, Brian.
Okay. And we've got Ed Hannibal. Where's Ed? Ed's coming up in a moment. There, we got Ed.
Right here from Chicago. Hey. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Ed. Thanks. And thanks for being on the show. Of course, you've been on the show before, Ed, but it's nice to have you back. We've also got...
Yeah, I with my other hat, ERC hat, right?
Absolutely. You're a man of two hats. I think many of us have got multiple hats, but yeah, you came on with your ERC hat and you're here with your Deloitte hat. One of these days, we're actually going to have to get you a hat so we can actually see the hat on air too. And we've got Anja from EY. So Anja, you run the internal program in EMEA for EY, don't you?
Yes, I'm an internal. I'm responsible for the mobility solutions. So policy, COVID, all that super interesting stuff. So greetings from sunny Germany.
Okay, and well, it's great to have you on the show, Andrew, and we'll be getting much more into that in a moment. And then last but by no means least, we've got the global head of, actually you don't call it global mobility, it's people of, is it?
Global Mobility Services, Brian.
But I never know. Every organisation has a different name for what they call the same thing, and it changes every few years. I think I seem to remember it being human capital, but it's people advisory services for one, and it's I don't know. I get confused. But anyway, you're the big cheese.
I'm not sure about that, and I only have one hat.
Anyway, great to have you on board, and also, so we've got Ed who's here from Chicago. Mark, I know you're in the UK, but you're Australian by birth, so I'm going to call you.
I'm wishing I was on an Australian beach right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're in Germany. Yeah. Well, New Zealand sounds even better at the moment, doesn't it? It seems things have got back to normal out there. So just to let you know who's here. I mean, we've got, oh my God, people from all over the world are coming in. I'm seeing people from Atlanta, from Amsterdam, from Delhi, from New York, from Dubai, from Bangalore, from New Jersey, from Connecticut, from Zurich, from Chicago, from Switzerland, from Ottawa, from Steve McGarry, who was on the show before, from WPP, from New York, from Philly, Michael Cadden from Living Abroad, who does run the New York chapter of the FEM. We've got people from Frankfurt, from San Francisco, from Brooklyn, from Denver. I'm trying to think if there's anywhere we don't have people from. California. Anyway, we've got loads and loads. I think we've now got nearly 270 people live watching us. So I suppose we'd better move on then, rather than sort of chat, and let's get in. And we always start with, actually, no, before we do, I've got a little sort of question I want to ask you guys. And this is my weather vane test of how we're feeling about coronavirus. And I say that because I asked the same question a few weeks back, and I'll ask the audience too. And the question I want to ask is, I call it the handshake test. And the question is this: when do you think you will next shake somebody's hand, a business acquaintance at a business meeting? So that, I suppose that means you actually got to get out of your house and go to a physical meeting and shake somebody's hand. And I'll give you three choices. The first choice, sorry, four choices. The first choice is, I'm going to shake somebody's hand at some point within the next 3 months. The second choice is, it won't be in the next 3 months, but it will be sometime in 2020. The third choice is, I don't think it's going to be 2020. I'm going to shake somebody's hand the next time, but it'll be at the earliest in 2021. And the last choice is, shake somebody's hand. That's so last century. I'm never going to shake anybody's hand again. That concept has just gone. So I don't know who wants to kick off, but where are you? When do you think you'll next shake somebody's hand? And in the audience, tell us what you think. When do you think you're next going to shake somebody's hands? I was asked the question, with or without gloves, somebody said. I'm doing for without gloves, okay? So without gloves, when do you think you'll next shake somebody's hand? Okay, let's go around the table and ask. Let's start with you, Ed.
Brian, I think it'll be this year. As I said to you, I am a hugger. So the handshake is sort of the business hug. I just, maybe I have to wash my hands right shortly after that or hand sanitize. But I think we all need the human touch. So I see it before the end of the year.
So with you, it's going to be nice to meet you. Now I just need to wash my hands afterwards.
Maybe.
I'm not sure what the message is there, but what about you, Claire? When you think you're going to shake somebody's hand?
Yeah, I'm with Ed. I think, I hope it's in the next 3 months. I'm definitely an optimist. I want to keep it authentic, so I don't want to go for my hand sanitizer straight away because I don't think that necessarily sends the right message. But I hope that it will be in the next 3 months.
I'll put up some of the comments that we're getting as well. Tammy Walsh, so last century. What about you, Julia? Where are you? Are you an optimist on the handshake, or are you a sort of a namaste?
I'm a bit of a hugger, really. I'm with Ed. I think by the end of the year.
Okay, and Mark, where are you in that?
I love that we have so many huggers on the line. It's quite impressive. There's a lot of affection in this crowd. I think it will be in the next 3 months for me. I actually saw a friend on the weekend, and after keeping a very nice social distance, at the end he went for a big handshake without hesitation. So I think there's a lot of people out there that like him are craving a bit of physical contact. So 3 months. Okay,
and Anja, where are you on the hugging or the handshake?
Well, on hugging and handshake, different things. But I think handshake have already gone out of fashion before COVID. So maybe never. Maybe they will never come into fashion again, and it will be hugs all around for the rest of our lives.
Okay, and who am I? I didn't ask you, Julia, did I?
Yes, you did.
Oh, I did. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll tell you what the audience said. Anyway, so I actually did this as a LinkedIn live poll a couple of days ago, and this was the answer that the poll gave. We had about 150 respondents, and 22% thought they would shake hands within the next 3 months. 19% said it would be sometime in 2020. By far the biggest category was 51% who said it would be 2021 at the earliest. And then there was 8 who thought that the world had changed and they were never going to do it. They were going to namaste or curtsy or whatever. Anyway, let's move on. What I'd like to do now is actually, Julia, if you could do I know people love your regular weekly immigration updates. If maybe, Julia, you could just talk to us a little bit about what's going on in the world of global immigration and the issues that are on your agenda.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks. And it's really lovely to be with everyone today. And as we've got so many people, whoops, sorry.
Right. Technical hitch.
Technical hitch, yeah. Technical hitch. Yes, if you've got so many people, and just going to talk for just 5 minutes today. And I wanted to say something about travel bubbles and compliance. So we've seen this unprecedented rise in travel bubbles, and sometimes they're called green channels or safe lanes or fast lanes. And they're really, really important. And it's a whole phenomena that's come up since we've had the pandemic. And the idea is that if you can get inside one of these travel bubbles, you can travel without quarantine or a very minimal quarantine. And we have been talking about these over the weeks, and you might recall, it does seem years ago now, but around the 15th of May, there was the first one, and that was Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. And they're among Europe's best performers at taming the virus. And then I did tell you all about the travel bubble in New Zealand and Australia, and also about China and South Korea. Now, on Monday, there was a fantastic new development because the travel bubble between Singapore and China opened. And just as a sort of practical example of how helpful it is, we were talking to a CEO who was living in Singapore, but he desperately wanted to go on a very, very urgent business trip to China. And all up to the opening of this travel bubble, we were saying he'd have to quarantine both ends for 14 days. And so it just made his whole trip unviable. And now we have the travel bubble, and he was literally one of the first people to use it. So the thing I just want to tell you all about is that there are a lot of very strict requirements with these travel bubbles. And in the case of, just as an example, the one between Singapore and China, you have to have a test within 48 hours before you leave to show that you are not positive for COVID-19. You have to give in a 14-day itinerary just to show that everyone knows exactly where you're going. And then when you arrive in China, you have to take another test, and there are now facilities in the airport, but you have to stay put for 1 or 2 days. And it's only after that will you be given the all clear to move. And what the authorities are doing are actually taking you to your place of work. So you also then have to download the travel app. So we've been talking about the China travel app a lot. But it is really important for you to look out for these travel bubbles and find out as much information as you can. And then when you have located the travel bubble, really make sure that you tell all your travelers exactly what they have to do in terms of the visa requirements, the quarantines, and the health regulations. And sometimes there's not a lot of information about the travel bubbles. We're just hearing rumors. So you have to kind of research hard for the information. Now, the second issue I just wanted to talk about today was compliance. And again, this is something that we've talked about before. And you'll remember that we talked about in China, the jogger that went jogging when she was really supposed to be in quarantine and was arrested. And the rules are getting stricter and stricter, certainly in certain parts of the country, in the world. So I wanted to give you a couple of examples of cases that have happened, very recently. So by way of example, in Singapore, there was a citizen who came into Singapore from Vietnam. He was served with a stay-at-home notice. And obviously, when you get the notice, you have to go straight home. And he decided to stop off at the food court to have his favorite meal. And he was so excited, he took a selfie eating this meal. And the Singaporean authorities monitoring social media very carefully, and he's now serving an 8-week prison sentence. And there was another case of a person who came across on a ferry from Indonesia to Singapore. And again, they were served with a stay-at-home notice. And they decided they just didn't want to quarantine. So they got back on the next ferry and went back to Indonesia. But then when they did come back to Singapore, unfortunately, the authorities immediately could see that they had already been served with a stay-at-home notice. And that person is also serving a prison sentence. So I just wanted to raise these two issues this week of the travel bubble and also the compliance issues, because I think those are two things everyone should really be focusing on. Thank you, Brian.
Okay, thank you so much. Actually, one question that just came up, and I'm sure you know the answer, Julia, and I suspect you'll have practical experience of this, Anja, is Jack Craven said, I heard everything in Germany is open and travel visas are not a problem. Is this accurate?
I wouldn't necessarily say that everything is open in Germany, but it does seem quite normal over here. We still have to register when we go into the office. Not every office has called everybody back. Schools are not necessarily open everywhere in Germany, but it's actually feels a lot more normal. And when I talk to other people in other countries that are still under lockdown, it's really interesting what different perspectives, just in a very short time frame, can be created around the COVID-19 situation when lockdown kind of lifts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and just
really, yeah, I was just going to say, it's really interesting. There was a YouGov poll last week just to say which countries have managed it best in Europe, and their political ratings have increased. And your chancellor in Germany, she's really got very, very high approval ratings for the way that everything has been managed in Germany. The UK is the lowest, unfortunately.
There's probably some luck in there as well.
And just another comment that came in from Tracy Kautzman. At the France-Germany border yesterday, a Swiss car tried to get into France via Germany and was turned away. No reason to go through France. You still need a reason to go into the country with documents. Mm-hmm. Anyway, let's move on. I want to get on to an issue and bring in our guests. And it's a fairly big subject, so which for some reason my banner's not coming up. So I always have these problems with the technology. But I want to get onto the subject of the future of work. And let me just ask you, how do you think, and maybe I'll start with you, Mark, how do you think work is going to pan out? I mean, obviously you yourself run a very large team in your practice. Are you going to see people working from home a lot more, not going to the office? Do you think people are going to go into the office? And if I could just ask the audience, well, how do you think work is going to start looking in the future? But Mark, what's your vision of the future of work, if that's not too big a question to start with?
It's a huge question, but it's also a pretty exciting one to think about. So I do think there will be a lot more working from home or working from somewhere other than the office. And I think that will be quite a good thing, but I don't think the place of the office, or at least the place where people get together in person, will disappear. I think when it comes to innovation, real collaboration and generation of new ideas, building of relationships in difficult circumstances or sort of exciting change projects, I think there's a lot that comes from in-person interaction that will need to be restored for us really to be the best we can be. But for me personally, the interaction via video call with my global team has made me feel closer to them than when I was spending my life on a plane, getting to as many of them as possible. And that's been great.
Is everybody enjoying it, or are you desperate to get back into the office? What about you, Claire?
Yeah, I think that varies, but I do think that when you're working on a new project or with a new client, for example, so you haven't got those established connections and relationships built in, perhaps, or even working with new teams within the firm, that's when you really miss, I think, that connection that you can get by meeting people in person and reading all those other signs other than what people are actually saying and what you can see from here up. So yeah, I am missing it, but equally, I'm very much enjoying kind of the freedoms and the flexibility that comes from, being able to be more in control of my working hours, that type of thing. And I do think, it does really vary. I know anecdotally we'll say a lot of the more junior people, the younger people in my team are desperate to get back in the office. Some of those people that are kind of more experienced, kind of saying, well, actually, I'm really enjoying being out of London. So I do think there's a whole variety of reactions. That's a bit anecdotal and a bit of a generalisation, but definitely seeing some people that cannot wait to get back.
Yeah. And Ed, with you, I mean, your commute presumably has gone down from whatever it was to a few steps. Is that good news, or, are you sort of missing it?
Well, considering I spend way too much time at O'Hare and on planes all over the world, I have been receiving sort of "we miss you" notes from American Airlines. But all kidding aside, it's been nice to be at home. I don't know about others, and maybe it's just our culture, but this idea of connecting cameras and the Zoom world and even cameras on Skype are now almost mandatory from the closest way to see people, to see how they're doing. So it's been interesting how that nothing's going to replace the face-to-face, right? And how we collaborate. But it has been interesting to see how cameras have become part of a culture and in some insight, it's only some, into well-being.
And I wonder how it's sort of, affecting your own businesses, because presumably, all your businesses depend on people moving to a greater or lesser extent. But we might have this huge backlog that there's been a period where actually, not much has happened, but then all of a sudden there'll be masses happening as everybody says, oh my God, all those moves that got put on hold, all of a sudden, we've got to sort of, we've got to do it. I mean, are you working with clients on how they remobilize or internally, are you working, Andrea, on remobilization? Any of you, I mean, Mark, do you want to sort of talk about, what clients are doing or how you're helping clients remobilize?
Yeah, and I think this is an interesting one, because I think in the middle of a crisis, we are all consumed by the crisis, but I think we've got a few months under our belts now. And looking back, I think when we were dealing with what was happening in the earlier part of the year, we now realize that things were frozen to a great extent. Travel was frozen. A lot of businesses were back to bare basics. A lot stopped trading altogether. The authorities gave us lots of concessions. And so to a great extent, we had this sort of static environment to go find our people, make sure they were safe and account for what was going on. I think the next phase is going to be incredibly complicated as borders start to reopen, but in a very sort of haphazard fashion, as Julia talked about, with no sort of great coordination between them, different rules on each side. And we also find that people's preferences and comfort levels with what happens next is going to be differing, but then also the authorities are going to start to shift from concession to revenue generation and border protection, which I think is going to make remobilization much more than just where do we want to get our people to, but it's a where can we get our people to, what's appropriate, what are our policies, can we allow people to stay where they're most comfortable, or do they need to, for example, in some cases, stop work?
And a question that came up from Abigail Stevens, I just flashed it up on screen there, is it would be great to know from the Big Four if they've seen a loss of productivity increase or the same whilst people work from home.
Brian, look, Deloitte took 300,000 people around the globe and in a matter of hours went to remote. And we achieved that. Our people have been very productive. I think there's a human aspect of people are working their tails off and no one's taking PTO because they're kicking the can down the road because of this theoretical concern that, hey, maybe things will get better and then I can take a really nice vacation. And so I think as leaders, we have to make sure that we're leaning in to take care of our people right now because they are working really hard. Productivity is there. We're all living in this sort of Zoom world of hours and hours of Zoom calls, but people need to make sure that they do get the PTO because we're halfway through the year right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll come to you in a moment, Claire, if I may. But before I do, just to let you know, in terms of remobilization, I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but Benevo actually produced a checklist for anybody looking to remobilize, and it's available free of charge on our website. So if anybody's looking, it doesn't give any answers. It just gives lots of questions to ask about how to remobilize. So if anybody's interested, do sort of go onto the website and you can pull one down. But Claire, what's your view from your perspective, sitting in PwC? Are you working with a lot of clients on remobilization? Is that a topic that everyone's talking about at the moment?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. One is that a lot of people are really busy. So I've been working with a lot of clients who are saying that their bosses are saying things like, "Hey, things must be really slow. What's keeping, what are you doing?" And actually, these people are working 12-hour days, 7 days a week in some cases. I heard from a client who was telling me that just this morning. But I think there is definitely a perspective here that mobility teams have been leaned on to help people that aren't necessarily just assignees or transfers, but have been involved in a much broader scope of mobile employee and helping with that. In terms of then future perspectives, we kind of ran a survey. We had 350 companies participate. 44% of those companies told us, yeah, they think mobility will get straight back to business as usual as soon as possible, within the constraints of the different country and regional restrictions. But I do see already a number of clients that have put some moves on hold, are already trying their best to see how quickly can we get those moves out there. There's kind of like that almost backlog of moves they're trying to move quickly, as well as then also in parallel with that, taking pause and taking the time to reflect and think a bit more strategically about what's mobility in our organisation, what roles or what, is it possible for us to move the work to the person rather than the person to the work? Where is that possible? Do we want to enable and do that? Versus actually, no, there's a core part of our business that is about sales or drilling or being, face-to-face, meeting clients, and we're always going to have to enable that. So yeah, lots to be thinking about, but certainly very busy is what I'd say I'm seeing my clients being.
And I guess from your point of view, Julia, the last thing you want is tens of thousands of visa applications all coming in at the same time and some huge sort of logjam. Are you working with clients to sort of encourage them to prioritize the ones that they really need to move? Or
yeah, I mean, we're doing a huge amount on remobilization policy. So for example, in the US, we're waiting for this proclamation to come out. So, what will be clients' reactions to that? What steps do they want to take in response to that? In Europe, how can you move people effectively using different European strategies? Should you set up a subsidiary in one country to benefit from different Europe, like the intercompany transferee directive? We're doing a lot of work in Asia, a lot of work in Singapore, particularly saying, do you think it's a good idea to apply for so many S or EP passes, given the bent of the Singaporean government to sort of, really protect resident labour. So at the moment, we've got teams of people doing that kind of remobilisation strategy and thinking. And to Claire's point, I think people are a lot busier. But I think exactly as Claire is saying, it's because they're doing so much more than they were ever before, because they've got all of that strategic place, which we've all said is a good thing because it gives them board presence and a seat on the board, to really talk about it. But it's in addition to the day job of actually thinking about the transactions. So I too see people just working absolutely round the clock. And I know Steve McGarry, he commented rightly so that, with lockdown for large numbers of weeks, no one has had anything much else to do than work. So productivity has been ridiculously high.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Steve. And Steve, of course, was a guest on the show a few weeks back. Andrew, I mean, from your point of view, obviously, you've got a team of people who are handling all the moves. How's that happening at the moment? How are you managing that team at the moment?
I think I can absolutely agree with everybody else. It's been crazily busy because the amount of calls has absolutely gone up, particularly in the mobility world. We had a lot of individuals that were stuck. Somebody stuck in a country while they were out on the business trip. That's not the normal business, and it took an enormous amount of time to resolve some of those issues. And we have now gone into scenario planning. So we took the economic models, the V shape, U shape, L shape, and kind of tried to see if we can have remobilization strategies around that. And also looking at travel bubbles. I've just come out of a conversation about can we already, run some programs again in the EU that I'm expecting to be a travel bubble quite soon. And what does that mean? And what do we do? What I see though is that we do focus on business critical mobility. I think on the developmental mobility, the jury across the industry is probably still out when that will be remobilized again. because we're trying really hard to get the business critical out. But I think almost all companies now have a significant portion of developmental mobility, and that's a little bit more dicey. Yeah.
Somebody's raised the question, I think it was, well, actually a few people, but Rob Zeiss raised a question here. What ways are companies doing team building in the work from home environment? Any events or contests run remotely? I mean, what are people doing to, to manage the team and keep morale up and to, ensure everyone stays connected? Anything exciting anybody's doing to manage their teams remotely? Anyone want to take that
Brian,
one?
I guess
I won't. I'm not trying to plug a technology, but it has been really interesting to see even after. So you can host a big meeting in, say, Zoom, but there's the breakout functionality, so that then you can actually create separate breakout rooms, so you can have more intimate conversations. We've done this for social reasons with our teams to celebrate, as well as then bring the group back together, so that you're still keeping that human connectivity, your regular check-ins. But that has been, in my opinion, and in our team's opinion, it has been nice to allow us to sort of have separate breakouts where they're more intimate conversations, and then you can collect the group back together. And
Tara Hagen, where's Tara from? Tara is Global Tax Network. She said they've been doing tax bingo. So that's a new one on me. You must tell us more, Tara. Put it in the comments. Tell us more about it. Any other weird and wonderful games anyone's doing out there?
We've been doing a little bit of a mixture of a quiz or trivia night with bingo, Brian, that one of our team, Paris Quinn, came up with, which is brilliant. But I think there's also a little bit of quiz fatigue. And we sort of ran into that.
I'm so past quizzes, I must say. Yeah.
Well, the thing that seemed to flip it for us is we changed the quizzes to questions about each other in our leadership team or around our global team, and all of a sudden people are back in the game again and really excited and interested about it. So it's interesting how many people can't answer the questions that are about themselves.
or don't want to, yeah.
I just agree with that. We've done a kind of guess whose fridge it is, guess the contents of the fridge, or guess whose drink this is, their favorite cocktail, stuff like that. So it's been a good way of getting to know people in a way that we never did when we worked together for years in the office.
I was speaking
to some global mobility head today, and he said he'd been invited to a dinner, and it was this organization, and they sent everybody who was going to have the Zoom dinner this box that arrived at the door, and with very, very careful instructions about how you were to lay out the first course and the main course and cook it in the microwave. And then everyone went out and did their first course and second course, and then sat down around Zoom and ate the dinner. So that's quite inventive.
I wonder how mobility policies might change as people start working from home more, or is that, or just maybe not just even for assignees, but for employees generally? What sort of policies are we putting in place? I mean, on the one hand, people going to work don't have to pay commute, so maybe you could actually sort of reduce salaries and reduce allowances. On the other hand, they're using their home offices and they're using their own expenses, and they might need some of their own equipment. Is anyone doing anything? I mean, again, companies in the future might be saving rent if they can downsize their offices because they've got more people working from home. Is that going to be passed on in any way to employees? Has anybody seen anything on sort of work from home allowances?
Yeah. I think a number of companies have started doing it. We're in the middle of discussing what to do, because we also have to consider that, Claire was saying, for somebody who's more experienced, it's actually fine to work from home, but not everybody actually has a dedicated office. We have issues, for example, in some of our emerging markets where we don't have bandwidth. There's just not enough internet availability for people to work from home. And if we look at very crowded cities in other emerging markets, people actually need to sit on their bed to work. And that's not really sustainable either. So I think the whole working from home, I think it's a big topic. Currently, I don't think anybody has had the golden solution quite yet, but it's definitely something that's on the agenda.
Yeah. Let me move on to a slightly different subject. We touched on it a bit earlier. I think I've lost somebody.
You lost Mark.
I've lost Mark. Come back, Mark. All is forgiven. Hopefully he'll join us shortly. Hopefully he'll join us shortly. His connection must have gone. The big four just became the big three.
Now.
And Fragomen. But he'll come back. He can't hear me. He's gone. Just 300 other people can hear me, and 5,000 after the next few days. Mark will be back in a second, I'm sure. As long as it's not your host, then we can carry on. But I wanted to talk about another subject, which was virtual assignments. And I was just wondering whether, whether you're seeing that, and if so, what some of the issues surrounding it might be. I know, Anya, you started off by saying that, you weren't really that sure of the concept because people are either moving or they're not. But we could have a situation where people are working for an overseas organization, but they're just working from their home office in their home country, so they don't physically transfer. So I appreciate immigration may not come into play, but I thought that tax and employment law and other issues like that, maybe even other social laws like, discrimination laws or human rights laws or healthcare laws might start coming into play. Has anybody seen any experience of that? Here's Mark. I can see. We'll bring back Mark. Mark, we lost you. I'm
sorry about that. I got lost along the way.
Okay. Anyway, it's nice to have you back. I don't know if you heard what we were saying, but we're talking about virtual assignments, and I don't know whether, Claire, you've had any experience of working with clients on this whole question of virtual assignments.
Yeah, definitely. So it's the buzzword of the moment, I think, or buzzwords. Yes. And so we've got some companies that are saying that's just the buzz of the moment, and it doesn't work for us. Our business is about having people doing their jobs. We make planes, let's say, we make stuff, and it won't work for us. So there's some that are saying no, not for us. There's others that are saying, well, actually, let's think about what roles it could work for. We've kind of got another extreme of companies saying, yeah, let's really think this through. So I think there is a bit of, okay, let's get on the right, let's get on with this and start thinking about what it is we want to do, and thinking strategically about, okay, what do we even mean by virtual assignments? I think that's the first bit. So we're trying to think, okay, we're talking about international remote working. Well, actually, there's a real opportunity here for mobility professionals to get a seat at the table, to use that phrase, and say, okay, as a company, what is it we want? What's our ambition here? What is it we want to achieve? And is it an opportunity to reset and think, okay, in a world where we want to have kind of more healthy, sustainable planet, so more sustainable mobility where we need to move people, and more responsible mobility from an equality perspective and giving more people more opportunities, what do we want to achieve? And then what can we allow, to your point, Brian, around what are those tax rules, what can we say is all down to the employee to look after versus what do we have to be mindful of as an employer? So I do think companies are really taking the time to think through that quite thoughtfully, and think about what they want to achieve and then what they can and will be able to enable. So I think we're very much at the thinking stage in the work I'm doing with my clients at the moment.
Would anybody like to? Sorry, Mark, you come in.
I was going to say, just to follow on from what Claire was saying, I think that those companies that we're working with that are either the closest to or are starting to roll out virtual assignment programs are also, or seem to be, those that are most focused on diversity and inclusion as an organization, and also the closest to or already in play of rolling out work from anywhere policies. And I think it's interesting that sort of pushing the boundary seems to go across all three of those fronts.
Yeah,
Brian, sorry, can I come in? Just on a technical point, we're getting a little bit of feedback. Can I ask the panelists who aren't speaking any time just to quickly mute yourselves when you're not speaking so we don't get the feedback? But sorry, Ed, you were about to say.
Yeah, I just want to, I think, I'm not trying to pile on here, but let's think about this. For the last 3 months, we have actually proven the concept of remote work, and different companies are at different maturities of that. But this is the exciting time for global mobility to actually get bigger. We may see traditional expat assignments flat down, sort of cross-border activities, maybe around business travel. But there's a whole remote work compliance aspect that smells a lot like traditional mobility, that this is the opportunity for corporate mobility people to lean in and their role to get bigger. So it's more than just being at the table. They're now at the front end of talent acquisition. So I think this is a really exciting time for global mobility professionals.
So do you think, I mean, this is the poll I put out to the audience. I'll be interested to see their comment. Do you think virtual assignments are the next big thing? And as an aside to that, it should be helpful, and Lisa Johnson from Crown asked us this question in the comments box, could somebody try and define virtual assignments? What are we talking about? Anyway, I mean, if anybody wants to give it, otherwise I'll give it a go. If anybody wants to try and define it, is it the next big thing?
The ones that we're seeing that are actually being put in place, Brian, are those where it's about giving the people the opportunity to develop international experience without moving abroad. And typically that's been within limited time projects or short-term, what would otherwise have been short-term assignments. The anticipation, once we're out of the lockdown phase, is that there'll be some level of business travel that provides that in-person interaction with that local market, that local team. But the vast majority of the work can be done from home. And I think that takes away all of those personal considerations that sometimes are seen to prevent people from putting themselves forward for international experiences.
And where would the cost be borne? So I'd be sort of quite techie on this. And it's been 1,000 years since I ever did any tax. I appreciate that while some of you are a tax background, I think most of you have got sort of more sort of strategy positions at the moment. So I'm not asking anybody holding themselves out as a tax expert. But if somebody is working, let's say it's somebody in whatever, New York, working for the Tokyo office, and they're based in New York, that's where they live, that's their employer is the New York company. I'm presuming that under a virtual assignment, they remain employed by the home country. But is the cost of that then recharged to the local subsidiary? And then, are there any consequences here we've got to look at? I mean, I appreciate it's easier for the more junior people than more senior people. I might get into cabinet issues, but I'm just trying to get my head around what some of the issues might be that people need to be careful of.
I think just on those two examples I mentioned, Brian, just a mass generalization in something that has no defined approach at the moment. For the project version of that virtual assignment, the cost would go into the project. For the short-term assignment version, it would often stay in the home employment company. But I'll hand over to the others to see whether they're seeing the same sort of thing take shape.
Claire, do you want to come in on that? What is a virtual assignment in your world?
Yeah, I think this is it. So I guess I was just looking at the definition that we were trying to conjure up the other day. And we've got employees who choose to work remotely in a different country to the one where they're employed. And I guess that's slightly different and nuanced to virtual assignments. But, that's like me working on a London contract, but working from my home in France or from the French office, let's say. And I guess, the risk that will be front of mind for many tax professionals in particular will be the permanent establishment risk. And then potentially payroll withholdings, that type of thing. So I think that's where companies really do need to be very thoughtful about what they're going to enable. And I think that comes then back to governance and being even aware of, because there's nothing to say that these things weren't already happening, but I think the pandemic has definitely brought this, to light more than perhaps it was in the past. And I think there is a bit of a huge opportunity for companies to rethink, well, what is our purpose and, what's our position on paying the right taxes in the right places, and how can we best do that in a world that's very much changed? So I'm not saying that they're the answers, but I think there's definitely companies giving a lot of thought to all of that and how they position that in the global world. And I also think maybe there's an opportunity for us as a profession to try and push the boundaries of or things like the OECD, because I do think the models about how things are taxed and how presence is looked at maybe hasn't kept up with the globalized world that we're now in, albeit that's going to be complex as well, because I guess countries are going to now very much be looking to protect revenues, given the huge bailouts that governments have given. So very complex, and lots to consider. But again, I think that's a great opportunity, like the panel have said, for Mobility really has the expertise to help the company, deliver and achieve the ambitions that they might want to set here.
Absolutely. Let me move the conversation on a little bit, and I want to get onto the subject of technology, and whether we can make mobility more digital. I mean, I think I don't get shot by the audience, but I would take the view that actually, as an industry, we've been quite slow to adapt to new technologies in some ways over the years. I'm sure I'll get shot down for that comment, but that's a view of mine. But what can we do? There's going to be a lot of pressure, I'm sure, post-COVID for cost reductions. Companies are obviously drawing in their horns. If they are going to move people, they're going to want to do it as cheaply as possible, as effectively as possible, efficiently as possible, with minimum cost. Do you see things when you sort of look at the whole sector, not necessarily just what you're doing, but amongst your clients generally, areas where things could be made more efficient from using technology, and indeed in your own practices? Obviously, we've seen things like, I don't know, digital tax briefings, but coming in, are there things you could see coming in that might make the whole mobility experience more digital and less manual, less analog?
Brian, if you accept what Claire and Marc were just saying in this whole new world of remote work, and how that's sort of the marriage of business travel and work from home, those concepts, and mobility is getting bigger. If you're a mobility professional, the ask is going to be, can you take this on, and the compliance of it, but you will need access to real-time data. So we're going to need access to information immediately to be able to know where your employees are, when they're working, and on a real-time basis. And so that's going to be the challenge for the entire ecosystem, to be able to enable our clients in many fashions to be able to access that data. So collaborating on data, and then physically, how are we going to do that, via any kind of digitization? And I think that's going to be across the whole spectrum. And I look at that even from my ERC hat, how do we start to enable that with APIs, flat files? I think it's going to be a journey for people who are on the end-to-end ecosystem.
Okay. And Andrew, are you doing stuff within your practice to become more digital in the way you manage your program?
We are thinking about offering a lot more self-service, from starting to find opportunities on more on a self-service level, putting a lot more of the processes into a digital format. Absolutely, yes. It's the question of tools, because whereas we're always a niche, so it's actually not easy to find those tools. I think there's great potential. I'm still looking for the Amazon for mobility, where somebody can actually select everything themselves and actually manage their moves themselves. But so far, I don't think we have gotten quite as far on the side. But it's massive improvements, massive investments within the big fours, as well as probably yourselves. So we're definitely on the journey. But can I just quickly pivot back to the virtual assignments, because we think that people will like it, but we have just gotten out a survey, and the overwhelming majority of our developmental short-termers did not want virtual assignments instead of an assignment, which I thought is interesting as well, because I think there's potential, but there's also our client side, which is the assignees, which might not always kind of see stuff in the same way then we might want to see it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, actually pivoting back again to something that we were talking about earlier, I would ask everybody, how many days do you think you're going to be working from home, in the future? you know, Claire, I mean, you know, in the future, I mean, do you think you're going to be working from home 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 5 days a week?
Couple of days a week, perhaps. I'd say that in the past, client commitments aside, I would work from home a day a week. So to be honest, I don't see much change there because I kind of thrive on meetings with clients, meetings with my teams. Or I'm traveling. So yeah, I'd say 2 days a week, perhaps max.
Okay, looking at the audience, I'm getting people saying 3 days a week. That seems to be coming up. 4 days a week. Giovanni DiCarlo, 5 days a week, but not from home, but working remotely. So, you know, most people are now saying, I'm getting from the audience here, they're going to be working home, you know, 3, 4, 5. Joe Brophy from HSBC working from home 5 days a week. So, you know, it may well be that this is a big change that we're going to see forever because we've all learned how to do it. What about you, Mark? In your experience, do you think you and indeed your colleagues around the world have been working from home a lot more than they used to?
So my first work from home day in my career was when we shut the office in London in March. But I've had some time to get used to it, and I think I'll probably be working a couple of days a week from home from here on. I'm similar to Claire, and I think the really interesting thing about this whole change is that there's some power that's been put back in the hands of employees to choose what works best for them, and that might change over time. And as long as people are getting their work done and effectively engaging with clients and their teams, then that's okay. And that might be 1 day, it might be 5 days, as long as things are working. I think we should be embracing it.
Brian,
yeah, Ed, go for it.
Yeah, can I just comment? I struggle to answer this question. I think maybe if we believe that 18 months out, I mean, I look at I live in Chicago, and from a duty of care perspective, from an employee, you know, public transportation to an office, elevators to a floor, I in this COVID environment, until we get through this, I think it's going to be some significant combination of face-to-face in an office, and it will be at really an employee's comfort level. And, you know, Chicago just opened up as a city a week ago last Wednesday. So I miss that human touch of being in the office, but the unknown is how long are we going to need to really watch COVID and our employees. So that's the only struggle. And that I would then extend that to even seeing clients. I don't think clients want to see, as much as they may love all of us on the Big Four, I don't think we're going to be invited to their campuses or headquarters because they can't control us, you know, who we've talked to, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're into our last few minutes, but maybe I'll just sort of quickly go around the table. One last question, which is silver linings. I mean, I think maybe working from home is one of them, but what silver linings do you see coming out of where we are at the moment? And maybe I'll start with you, Julia.
Sorry. I think that where we were headed with global mobility, that really we needed to bring on technology for the more transactional work. We needed to really be focusing on the strategy. And if anything has happened, really, this has accelerated everything. And we've really seen that, I think, with industries, even with, say, the retail industry, you know, the way things were going, we could have seen that. But I think a lot of things have been accelerated. And I think a lot of new ideas, new agility, and really, you know, some very good things can come out of this rethinking. And for global mobility professionals, I think to move into a space that's more strategic and to really partner with business to really help their growth agenda is a better place of being than down in the weeds with the transactional work. So I think, you know, that there are positives about everything.
Absolutely. I mean, the idea of, and we've talked about it before on this show, the whole sort of seize the day, and this is the chance to make ourselves more strategic, I think is a big one. Claire, what are your silver linings?
I think I'd just echo what Julia said. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for the industry and for clients to reset and take this opportunity to say, we can't go back to the way things were before, that were clunky and kind of operational without technology. And not really knowing always why we were moving someone, what the plan was going to be and what success could look like, both for the business and for the employee, and then just letting them get to the end of a move and then kind of wonder where I'm going next. I think we've got to get smarter about that. So I think we're moving from mobility to workforce. I think the scope could be bigger. I think there's great opportunity to digitize, and then actually get the operational stuff done, either stopped where it actually wasn't adding value, automated, lean on your vendors more, and then the in-house teams focus much more on the strategy, like Julia says, and really helping the organisation achieve its ambitions for the future, and being very close and enabling of that, rather than the policeman that stops things happening when they've already kind of happened. I do think it's a fantastic opportunity if we take it and seize it.
Okay, well, we're pretty much out of time. I think it's wonderful to hear these silver linings, and I'm really grateful to everybody who's been on the show, and thank you to everybody in the audience. It just remains for me to remind everybody we're back this time next week, and it's with Mike Piker from Philip Morris and with Michelle Durkin formerly from Tether, now actually with us at Benevo, and we're going to be talking. We've got a whole host of fascinating subjects we're going to be catching up on next week, and we've got some more interesting shows lined up in the future. So anyway, thank you to all our guests, and thank you for all the audience, and I'll see you all again this time next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.